So many thanks for inviting me for a lecture. Andreas Ruby called me and said I have to tell you something about the reuse of modern architecture, but unfortunately I can't give a lecture anyway, not even about this subject, because I have a problem. There are too many things on the table. Do we need this? No.
I think they want to record it. We just leave it here.
Oh.
Does it bother you?
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry. So, something wrong with the sound?
No, absolutely.
Okay. One less. So, I'm a little bit exhausted because I saw, I got a 40 minutes tour through the National Museum and the history of Albania, so I'm a bit overwhelmed about what was going on here. So it's my first visit to Albania. I have, unfortunately, the first, because we did some years ago an exhibition about, which was called Balkanology, together with the Swiss Architecture Museum and with a German curator, and it was, so we did a lot of research in the Balkan region, because I think Vienna is, one of his main issues of Vienna is to connect the Middle European, South and Southeastern European countries. I'm always a little bit shocked when I go to France, Spain, or even Germany. They still believe that the Balkan is a no-go area, so I have to explain them the right situation here. So I said at the beginning I can give no real lectures because I'm a bit out of technology in this. Our IT supporter doesn't allow us to use PowerPoint, so I have to arrange some images for showing it. So I said also at the beginning about the question Andreas Ruby came up to me, but I will show you a research we did some years ago, ending up in a big exhibition in 2013. It was the exhibition Soviet Modernism from 1955 to the end of the Soviet Union in 1991. Because I will show you this research because it belongs also to other post-communist countries. How should they deal with this period of communist architecture? Because it's a very complicated question of history in a way, because most of all of the no, I think, let me say it in this way. This from the mid of the 50s, end of 50s of the last century to, let's say, beginning of 90s, it's the period of architecture which is in the most dangerous situation now, because it's too near to our time. So a lot of, and also the heritage commissions in Western European countries didn't take care about this period at the moment. In post-communist countries is a second problem, and that's the change of the system. So for a lot of the people, the buildings of this time are kind of symbols of a not so successful time. So they are also in political reasons against these buildings. So talking about this phenomenon of Soviet modernism, because it's, I think it relates a bit to a big question in your city about the pyramid. Unfortunately, there's a proposal by an Austrian architect, called Himmelblau, who was called, I think it was a winning competition, and he has to replace it. There's a nice anecdote on this side, because Wolf Brix from Coop Himmelblau was very critically against the last two biennales, in 2010 by Katsuya Sejima and in 2012 by David Chipperfield, by the Architecture Biennale in Venice, and in both times he wrote very polemic articles against this biennale's concepts, because he was not included. So I talked with half a year ago with Rem Koolhaas about his concept for the Biennale, and which will start this June. And he said, he explained me the program, and I said, oh, so it would be the third Biennale without Wolf Brix. And he said, no, he will be presented in the Austrian Pavilion, because the commissioner of the Austrian Pavilion of this year decided to show 200 parliaments of the world, and including the proposal of Wolf Brix for the parliament in Tirana. So we will have no critical article or polemic article by Wolf Brix against this coming up Biennale. So, back to the subject of Soviet modernism. We started in 2009 with the research, coming up from an accidental question by the Architecture Museum of Yerevan in Armenia, and they want to bring us a show to Vienna about the whole Armenian architecture. But we decided not to. We take the idea, but not the exhibition, because our museum is more specific, concentrated on the 20th century architecture and the future of architecture, and not to the total history of a country. So we get in contact with an art curator, Georg Schellhammer, who is very active in this post-communist, post-Soviet countries, in the growing young art scene there. So he gave us a lot of ideas and contacts in all these countries. So we decided at the end, in 2009, to make a research about the Soviet modern architecture from the beginning of from the end of Stalinism, beginning of Khrushchev, to the end of the Soviet Union. And we decided not to include Russia because of the bigness of Russia, and we were interested in local identities. The question we raised up in the beginning was, could it be possible that in the communist system, in the Soviet Union, that in the different countries of the Soviet Union, could it be possible that there are different kind of architectures in this time, under this very centralized planning processes in the architectural system in Soviet Union. Because as you may know that there was no private architect, private independent architect in these countries. In the Soviet Union, only this big state or governmental planning companies, more or less. And we found out a lot of interesting details which were against the myth about the Soviet architecture of this time. One was that they were not informed about what's going on in the world. That was absolutely not true. We met old architects, I think an 80 years old architect in Kyrgyzstan who worked in Canada and in the United States in the 60s, so and some others too. The second myth was the architects couldn't travel, Soviet architects, which was also not true. A lot of them stayed abroad and had excursions in some Western or Japanese or Asian countries. The next was they were not informed about what's going on in the West. They had no magazines, no books about Western architecture. That's also not true. Especially the libraries of the KGB had a lot of information about it, so it was not accessible for everyone, but I always said I know not a lot of Austrian architects of the 60s who were traveling or informed about what's going on in the world. So it was also nearly the same situation. So we have to ask us why we are nowadays attracted by those buildings. What's the reason for? Because my experience in the last years is that the young architectural students all over the world, I can say, are not really interested anymore in the beginning of modern architecture in the 19th century. They're interested in the heroes of the modern movement, Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe, or something else. They're not interested in architectural history anymore, I can say. But a lot of them are interested in what was going on just before they arrived on Earth. It's the architecture from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And I asked myself why this could happen. And a possible answer is that this period, after the Second World War, was the last time where there was a big responsibility from the government and from the official situation to the urban question, to the urban infrastructure. So it was the last period before we handed over all our cities to developers and private investments. So a lot of urban infrastructure was built in this time. Schools, opera houses, official buildings and so on. And it was the same big question in the Soviet system and communist system as in the West. So the same buildings were built in this time. So let's go to I will start with some images. I hope it works, no? So that was our area of research. So the 15, Soviet Union was divided in 15 countries with different histories. So it was Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Estonia, Georgia, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan. All of them merged during the time of the Soviet Union. It was not a special task of the Soviet Union, because also in the old Russian Empire, Russia included more than 100 nationalities. So Russia was always a multinational country. Just to give you, so what was the growing of this, the reason of the growing of the architecture of this time? As I said, it was the new policy by Khrushchev after Stalin. And one of the main goals of Khrushchev was the modernization of the Soviet society and to solve the problem of housing, which was not solved before. This interest in technology brings the Soviet Union in front in this time, and it was a the big event of and change of the Soviet identity was the Sputnik shock of '57. An interesting detail on this is because the Americans was really shocked that the Soviet Union was the first in the orbit, and an interesting detail is that in the American discussion in this time, in the late 50s, was created a new word. A new word everybody knows now, but it wasn't used before. It was creativity, because the Americans said in front of the Sputnik we were not creative enough to do the same. So that's the background of this word. And Yuri Gagarin's space flight in '61. So the whole situation was a kind of this Cold War battle between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War was the real subject of this time, and it's this also between the American lifestyle and Soviet leading role in some technologies of this time. There was a nice anecdote in '59 was a big exhibition about American architecture in Moscow. In '59, so about the question, the Soviet Union was not informed what's going on in America. And including in this exhibition was the so-called typical American house done by Raymond Loewy's design firm in America, and to show the Soviet people the American lifestyle. And there was the so-called kitchen debate. It was one of the first video taped events. So the Americans were bringing the new video technology in '59 to Soviet Union, to Moscow, and there was the kitchen debate between Khrushchev and Nixon. And Nixon was talking about the comfort of living in America, of the refrigerators and washing machines and all the technology in the household, and Khrushchev was answering, we don't need robots to eat, we have machines. We have more industrialization. So it was a very, you can find it on YouTube nowadays. It's called the kitchen debate. So back to our area. We have these 14 countries, and let's go to the next. I don't know why this. I fit it yesterday night, but it goes back in a way that I don't. So I have to prepare it. Sorry. We found out at the end of our research, or in the middle of our research, more or less, that we can really divide these 14 countries in 4 regions. Because of their history, because of their identity. And one region is the Asian countries, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, because they were more or less founded in the Soviet Union time. There didn't, some of them didn't exist in the borders as they have now, and it was a kind of occupation also by the Russian in this in these countries, there were, most of them were had only nomad culture, and so Soviet Union was bringing also all the industrialization to these countries. Kazakhstan was, as you know, the most important area for the rocket tests and rocket bases of the Soviet Union, because the country is so big, and if the rockets fall down, it doesn't matter. The next region and very different because of their history are the Caucasian countries, because in difference to the Middle East, to the Asian countries, they have a very long, strong history and identity. Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, and there were always the conflicts between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So when you go to, don't take care of your passport when you go to these countries, because when you have an Armenian stamp in your passport, you have a lot of troubles to enter Azerbaijan, and on the other way around also. It's because they have the Bergkarabakh conflict till now, and so when you ask Azerbaijan people, they don't even say, they even say that Armenian doesn't even exist, and the same the other way around. But both countries have this very strong, as I said, history, their own culture, and we will see that it reflects in a kind of local identity also in the Soviet type of architecture. The third one we called the Eastern Europes. And that's three countries: Belarusia, Ukraine, and Moldavian. And indifferent to what was interesting with the Caucasian countries also, they told us a lot of maneuvers and tricks they had to work against, to keep their autonomy against the central planning commissions of Moscow. So they really tried to be in a kind of independency from them. Totally different in the East European countries, in Belarusia, Ukraine, and Moldavia. They were really direct connected with the Soviet, with the Moscow governmental institutions and the Moscow policy. It's also because of the history of this area, you can say, because nowadays it's very actual because of the conflict of Crimea. Especially Ukrainian, in the history of Ukrainian, the borders permanently changed, parts belonging to Poland, belonging to Austria, belonging to other countries. So it was a very late time the Ukrainian got their real identity. It was just to establish a Ukrainian language was a idea of the 19th century, to be different to the others. On the other hand, that is, you can also take in mind that you can understand more the policy of Putin now, because for most of the Russians, in the history of Kiev Rus in the Middle Age was the birth of Russia around Kiev. And so it's, you can follow this idea that, or see now why the Russians are so keen that the Ukrainians should take no connections with the European Union and keeping it Russia anymore. And the same with Belarusia. And a very small part is Moldavia, which is still the poorest country of the post-Soviet countries, and we were not there because there was not really a lot happened also not in the Soviet time. And a very interesting other area, the last one, is the Baltic states. The Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, they were the only one which were not, how to say, there is, okay, let's say the other way around. The way why they are part of the Soviet Union come out from the Hitler-Stalin Pact in 1940, 41, and so they really feel from this moment on occupied by the Soviet Union. They were also, that's the reason why these three countries were the first who called their independence from Soviet Union in the end of the Soviet Union, and also this also played in the Soviet time a special role in the policy, the official policy of the Soviet Union. In these three countries that were the only one, they were all in their history and their culture, they were strongly connected with Germany and especially with the Scandinavian states and Scandinavian area. So it was only in these countries or provinces in Soviet time private architects exist. Private architects built single-family houses in these countries, and it was a kind of freedom in the system of the Soviet Union for the architecture in this area. It was also called a kind of the Baltic Sea was a kind of holiday area for the Soviet Union, just like the Crimea in the south, the Black Sea. So it was, yeah, a kind of better life in these countries. So that were the regional maps of this research we did. Always falling down here. So, come on. And I will go now through some pictures of to see the project. And you see then also the difference between the architecture in this time. You have this regional architecture of the Baltic with, which looks quite similar to Britain or Scandinavian architecture of this time. These light structures and especially these holiday resorts at the beach and single-family houses. And it was a private architect who built, I don't have it. Oh, I can show it here. This is the Andropov villa by a private architect, by Anne Kaup, built in the late 80s. So it's going slightly into this postmodern architecture, which was coming which started in the 70s, but really coming in the 80s, late 80s to the Soviet Union. A very important thing of in Estonia also was the Olympics of 1980 in Moscow, and in Estonia, in Tallinn, was the sailing for the Olympics. they also had in the Baltic states in this time a very high culture of interior design, and also a bit different to the other countries. A lot of women architects worked in this in the architecture in the Baltic states. So you see, what was also common with the Western architecture was in this time the kind of experiments, technological experiments with concrete and with free forms of concrete to get a kind of sculptural impression of the buildings. Now I'm in Eastern Europe, but in Eastern Europe and in the Asian countries were a lot of similar leading building types like the circus. Nearly every big city got in this time a permanent circus building, and also a lot of theaters were built in this period. So, and here you have in the Ukraine, you have this big resource on the Crimea, which were one of the biggest. This was a youth camp called Artek. It was bigger than a city. It was a whole region for the children, and it was always a special honor to get as a child in the Soviet Union to get the possibility to take part in Artek. You see also here a kind of Japanese influence on this holiday resort, and what also happened in these countries there in this time was big market buildings, which are big supermarkets now. So coming from in Asia, it's coming from the bazaars, but in Eastern Europe cities there were market halls. What's typically also is for the Ukrainian, in Ukrainian were a lot of architecture studios which were definitely from Moscow called experimental architecture. So in this technical and static experiences, and they were especially one big Institute for Experimental Architecture in Kiev was strongly connected with the offices of Ove Arup in London, and also with Frei Otto in Stuttgart. Frei Otto who did this hanging structure for the Olympics 72 in Munich, and also in Montreal at the World Exhibition. And they have a very close exchange of experience and in this hard-edge technical questions. We also saw in nearly every big city a kind of experimental housing blocks. So it's not always the prefab Soviet Khrushchevka houses from the same type across the country. Prefab house, mass housing in this time. It was originally developed in France and exported to the Soviet Union because there was a strong connection between especially the French Communist Party and the Soviet Union in the 50s and 60s. So also there were a Russian issue of l'architecture aujourd'hui. And I still remember one of the gifts Gagarin got was a Matra sports car from France. So so in nearly every country were experimental housing projects. So I can say at the end, in Austria or Germany were not more experimental housing projects than in the Soviet Union. It was just in the same way. The question was about new technologies and new typologies, for instance. Yeah, we are still in the Ukraine. You see these hanging structures and these big market halls, and that's a nice holiday resort. It was called Družba, and in Yalta, and there's the nice story around it that the CIA thought from the satellite shots of this building it could be a rocket base because it's a round-shaped, very surrealistic building. And that's also an interesting in Dnepropetrovsk in the last time, late 80s, built this hotel, and it was one also typical for the Soviet Union. At the end of the Soviet Union, it was never getting in use, so that it stands at the river of Dnieper just like a ruin, so empty as a lot of Spanish investments of the last years. So you see a very close relationship to the free forms and to the possibilities of the technology of concrete buildings. One interesting story is Slavutich in the Ukraine. You know, Chernobyl crash, and near Chernobyl was a completely new built city for the workers in Chernobyl. It was called Pripyat, for 40,000 people, and they have to leave the whole city in a few of hours, so just after the crash of Chernobyl. So it is a complete ghost city, modern ghost city nowadays. Now you can go, sometimes you can go back, it depends on political questions. And it's a kind of catastrophe tourism thing. There are some movies and photograph series about Pripyat because, as you can imagine, when you have to leave immediately your house and your living space, all the children's play grounds and all is just as it was at the moment when the people were leaving. And so the Ukrainian or Soviets had the problem to build a new city after Chernobyl, because Chernobyl worked till 2000, worked on after the crash till 2008, I think. So they had to build immediately a new city, and they found an area east of Chernobyl, north of Kiev, and built a new city in 3 years for 40,000 people. And the architectonically interesting thing of this project was that the provinces of the Soviet Union were called to donate buildings to this new city. And it was really, so it was finished really at the end of Soviet Union in around 1991. You can see in Slavutich really the different local styles, combined with a special project by a photographer. So you see now in the Asian provinces or states try to find a connection to the Islamic tradition in a way to have with this facade, with these grids at the facade and things like that, to have a natural ventilation and adapted to the Soviet style, because the Soviet architecture was already in the rules they have for the whole country, for the whole big country, was divided in or specified for different climate zones, because for sure you have to build another way around in Kazakhstan than in Siberia. So it was not the same all over the country, also of these climatic reasons. And as I said before, some of the cities was already created in the Soviet Union time, but didn't even exist before, just like Bishkek, the capital of Kyrgyzstan, or Almaty was also the former capital of Kazakhstan, was also a small town which were developed in the Soviet Union time. So the Soviets really tried to have this kind of diversification and special roles for special countries. So in Armenia was the leading country for the IT technology industry for the whole Soviet Union. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, you have, especially with the Asian countries, because the Baltic countries are now members of the European Union, but the Asian and Caucasian countries are now in a very, very different shape. You can really divide it in rich and poor countries. Rich one is depending on the oil and gas, like Azerbaijan, which is very rich, but Armenia is an extreme poor country, because there were built a lot of new towns in this time together with industries, but all this industry is gone, bought by oligarchs, sold the machines to India, and you can enter towns where 30,000, 40,000 people are living, towns from the 60s and 70s, and there's absolutely no working place there. So all of the people which are still living there are without work. Back to the architecture, you see here that at the end of the 80s, a kind of postmodern nationalism come up. Here you have a monument, a big one, and it's like a kind of fairy tale of the history of Kyrgyzstan. So it's you see now in the Asian states this facade grids and ornaments, they add to the Soviet architecture in this time. So, that was our research on the Soviet Union, because Soviet architecture in this time, it's necessary to coming to terms with the past and to develop a kind of awareness of the relevance of this architecture and this urban experience of this time. But anyway, it's also necessary to remember their own history, their own private history of every family of this time. And for this, I can show you a project by a photographer. She was she worked for us as a documentary photographer on a lot of these trips, and she was originally born in Romania, grew up under Ceausescu, and then lived in Spain. Is living now in Spain, in Madrid, and going with us to these destinations and taking photographs of these images, of these let's say, for her, these buildings of political power, and for her also it was a kind of remembering on the on the terrorist situation in which she grew up under Ceausescu. And anyway, she had a collection from her father of holiday slides of the 60s he took from the family on the beach. And she asking herself the question, why was it possible to get a kind of happiness under this strong political pressure? And so she developed this project Nostalgia and mixed pictures she did of the Soviet modern architecture with the pictures, the slides of her childhood holiday. So answering or trying to ask the question, why this contradiction between political power and private happiness, how did it work in this time? So that's from the zoo in Kiev. That's a picture of her kindergarten time in Romania. And some sentences about the situation in this time. My father carefully avoids using the word revolution when he speaks of Romania's political change of December 1989. Her father said, when Ceausescu was shot, seems more accurate to him. Who decided they had to shoot him? Not the people, that is certain. A picture of Dnieper River in Kiev, the big city square of Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan, and the residential area of the late 80s unfinished in Armenia. A picture of the settlements in historic settlements and wild settlements, illegal settlements in Armenia. Many of you may have seen the pics of the new Aliyev Center of Zahatit in Baku. There is was a similar situation. So the Aliyev dictatorship destroyed a whole living area to build this monument nowadays. So it's also typical for these countries. Aliyev was the head of the father of the dictator now. Aliyev was head of the KGB in the Soviet Union time, and they continued their leading role of the country till now. That was the well-known project in Georgia, the Ministry of Transport. It was a special story. It is a special story also here behind, because the Minister of Transport in this time was also an architect, so he commissioned himself, the minister himself as an architect, and also he raised the money from the ministry to build this monumental office building. About the there's also we visited it when it was just a ruin, more or less. It was empty, but was then 2 years ago bought by the Bank of Georgia, and they restore it and taking care of it and use it as an office building and an art space too now. That's from a holiday area in Kyrgyzstan. That's also the Sputnik as a children's playground. And another picture of Simona Rota of I forgot to mention the name of, she was on the title before, of the beach of the Black Sea in Romania. Our vacations are between 11 and 21 days per year, said her father. We can buy up to 15 liters of gasoline per month if you find it. With this amount, it is impossible to go on vacation to the beach and get back home. So sometimes before you should be saving gasoline or borrowing it from a friend to the limit of resources. That's from the new town Slavutich, housing blocks, a health resort, and now on the left side, the former Lenin Museum, now the Historic Museum of Bishkek, and the Aliyev statue in Baku in Azerbaijan. A victory monument in Bishkek for the freedom of Kyrgyzstan, an impression of holiday area. Another private photo. In the 1980s, people spent much of their time queuing from front of a store for meat, for milk, for bread. My main task after returning from school is going to stand in line to buy bread. We can buy 250 grams of bread a day per person. Each purchase is written down on a rationing card. Once, when we were still at the beginning of the month, I lost the card. So I lost the right of my family to get bread for the rest of the month. Memorial for the Armenian victims of the genocide, Turkish genocide in 1915, built in the Soviet time. A health resort named the one in the aquatic sports center in Tbilisi in Georgia. Here's again the writer's retreat in Armenia, at the Sevan Lake in the north of Armenia, on the border to Azerbaijan and Georgia. Health resort in Kyrgyzstan, and that's the city map of Slavutich. So the city plan was very similar to the Western ones in this time. Again, a private picture. In '72, my father won a car in the lottery, a Dacia 1100. In those years, there was still no electricity or water restriction for domestic use in the '70s. There was food in the shops, bars were open until dawn. By '87, when I became a pioneer of the Communist Party, everything seemed turned off in Romania. Electricity, water, food, and words. Everything, every evening from 8 to 10 at evening, we could get TV entertainment, 2 hours, Russian or Czech cartoons, and Ceausescu's face all the time, as well as news about the supposed progress of the socialist economy. Everything was a lie. The monument of the great patriot of the Second World War in Kiev. I'm sorry to have not a picture of two big, but I can tell you the story of two big monuments in Yerevan and in Tbilisi, that were on the top of hills in both cities, were huge monuments of Stalin in the Stalinist time. So after Stalin, in Khrushchev time, a lot of the Stalin monuments were destroyed, but not so fast in Georgia because Stalin was Georgian. So the Armenians were also a bit insecure about their Stalin monument, so they were also waiting some years. So, but at the end, 5 or 6 years after Stalin's death, the Georgians decided to destroy the Stalin monument, and so the Armenian did it also. So, and a friend of mine in Yerevan researched the history of this story from the change from the Stalin monument to the new one, which is the same in both countries, the new one, but there's no picture with the empty basement of this monument. So no one found any picture of the empty basement. The thing was that in this time, the other side, But both countries had in the late 80s and a Russian theater. So to have both late 80s or beginning of 90s picture. Armenia has, the buildings were built with this stone and not with concrete. And for the buildings, also the work. So we in Yerevan there, and he told us he's still now a young architects group in Baku in the 60s did the project in Armenia.